The square was filled with silence, heavy and sharp. Thousands of eyes stared at the young alien girl who stood in the middle, her hands tied, her face pale, her body trembling. She was accused of lies, dangerous lies. They said she spread fear. They said she spoke of enemies coming from the stars. The elders stood in front of her, their robes flowing like shadows. One of them raised his hand and spoke to the crowd. His voice was cold. She has spoken false words. She tried to spread panic. For this crime, she will be silenced forever. The people cheered, believing that justice was being done. But in the girl's eyes, there was no guilt, only pain and desperation. Her name was Elira. She was not a criminal. She was a historian. She had read ancient records. She had seen warnings hidden in old scripts, and she tried to tell her people, but now they called her a liar. Among the crowd stood a human. Daniel. He was a simple engineer, sent to help the alien colony with their machines. He did not belong to their politics. He did not belong to their culture. But as he looked at Elira, he felt something was wrong. Her eyes were not the eyes of a liar. They were the eyes of someone begging to be believed. The punishment was brutal. The guards dragged her forward. She screamed, but her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. They forced her down, and before she could resist, the blade struck. Her tongue was severed, blood staining the ground. A cruel silence fell. Her voice was gone forever. The crowd cheered again. They thought the danger was gone. They thought the lie was buried. But Daniel stood frozen, his heart heavy. He had seen something before the punishment. Elira had tried to move her hands. She had tried to draw shapes in the air. They looked like signals. They looked like warnings. That night, Daniel could not sleep. The image of her eyes burned into his mind. Why would someone risk everything if it was only a lie? Why would she face death and pain with such fear in her eyes? There had to be something more. He remembered the signs she drew. He remembered her looking at the sky, pointing upwards. Daniel was an engineer. He worked with machines. He worked with signals. He knew when someone was trying to warn of danger. In the silence of his small workshop, Daniel opened his console. He searched the colony's data streams. He scanned the frequencies, and there it was. Strange signals, faint but steady, coming from beyond the system. His heart raced. The girl had spoken the truth, but the colony would not listen. They had already decided. They had silenced her. And if he spoke, maybe they would silence him too. Daniel leaned back, sweat on his forehead. He was now holding a secret, a deadly secret. The colony was in danger. Elira had tried to save them, and they cut her tongue. The next morning, Daniel went to the square again. Elira was there, sitting weak and broken, her eyes lifted when she saw him. She could not speak, but her hands trembled as she scratched marks on the ground. Daniel knelt close, pretending to tie his boots. He saw her markings, crude arrows, lines pointing upward, and a single shape of fire. She was still trying to warn them, even without a tongue. Daniel felt anger rise inside him. Anger at the blind crowd, anger at the cruel elders, and anger at himself for staying silent. He stood up, his decision burning clear. He would find the truth. He would follow her warnings. He would prove she was not a liar. Because if he was right, the danger was closer than anyone could imagine. As the suns of the alien world set behind the tall towers, Daniel walked back to his workshop, his mind filled with fear and determination. The colony thought the lie was buried, but in truth, the story had just begun. Daniel's hands shook as he studied the strange signals on his console. The numbers did not lie. Something was out there, something moving closer. It was faint, almost hidden, but the pattern was clear. He zoomed in, line after line of data filling the screen. His heart pounded. This was no natural noise. It was a fleet. He leaned back in his chair, breathing hard. The colony would never believe him. They had already silenced Elira. They would laugh at him, or worse, they would call him a liar too. But he could not ignore this, not now. The next day he went to the square again. Elira sat in the shadows, thin and pale, her voice gone, her dignity broken, yet her eyes still burned with fire. When she saw him, her hands twitched weakly against the dirt. She began scratching symbols again. Daniel knelt close, pretending to adjust his tools. The lines she drew matched his data. Arrows, clusters, waves. It was the same pattern she knew. She had known before he ever checked. Daniel's chest tightened. She had tried to save them, and they destroyed her voice. Suddenly, a guard shouted at him, "Move away from her, human. She is a criminal." Daniel stood quickly, nodding as if guilty of nothing, but his mind was racing. If the guards noticed too much, both of them would be finished. That night, Daniel sneaked back into the restricted archives. The doors were locked, alarms ready, but he was an engineer. Machines were his allies. Within minutes, he bypassed the old systems. Inside, dusty records glowed on old screens. He searched for hours and then he found it, an ancient report hidden deep in forbidden files. It spoke of a war long ago, a race of invaders, ruthless and merciless. They had promised to return one day. The elders had sworn to bury the truth. They feared panic. They feared weakness. And so they destroyed the warnings. They silenced every voice that read. Daniel's stomach turned. It was all real. Alira had read these records. She tried to warn her people, and for that they punished her. As he copied the files, he heard footsteps. Guards. They were patrolling the corridor. His hands shook as he closed the screen and slipped the data chip into his pocket. The door hissed open. 2 soldiers stood there, their eyes narrowing. "Engineer, what are you doing here?" one asked. Daniel forced a smile. "Repair work, the systems were unstable." He lifted his tools, hoping they could not hear his pounding heart. The soldiers stared for a moment, then walked past. His breath came out shaky. He barely escaped. Back in his workshop, he placed the chip into his console. The ancient files glowed. Words and images of destruction filled the screen. Whole cities burning, fleets reduced to ash. The same enemy symbols matched the signals he had seen. They were coming back. He sat in silence, sweat dripping from his face. If the colony leaders discovered what he knew, they would destroy him too. But if he stayed silent, millions would die. The next morning he returned to Alira. She looked weaker, as if life was fading from her body. Daniel crouched beside her. He whispered softly, "I know the truth. I saw the files. You were right." Her eyes widened, tears glimmering. She could not speak, but she pressed her hands together, shaking. Then she scratched a single word in the dirt. "Soon." The word sent a chill through him. How soon? He wanted to ask, but her hand fell weakly. She had no more strength. Daniel's mind raced. He had to act before it was too late. That night, he studied the signals again. The enemy fleet was moving faster. They could arrive within days. He clenched his fists. His people back on Earth had to know. Humanity had to be ready. But before he could send a warning, his console flickered. A red alert spread across the screen. Access detected. Unauthorized breach. His heart froze. The colony's security had noticed his activity. Within seconds, the door to his workshop slammed. Open, armed soldiers stormed inside. "Step away from the console, human," the commander barked. His hands shook, but he raised them slowly. If they searched the system, they would see everything. The files, the signals, the proof, all of it. But before they could, the lights flickered. Alira appeared at the doorway, weak, barely able to stand. Yet her eyes burned like fire. She dragged her hand across the wall, pressing an old rune. The room shook, the lights went out. In that instant of darkness, Daniel grabbed the chip and ran. Outside, alarms screamed across the colony. Soldiers shouted. Searchlights cut through the night sky. Daniel ducked into the shadows, clutching the chip tight. Behind him, Alira stumbled but kept moving. Together, hunted, they vanished into the dark alleys. Above them, the sky flickered with faint lights. Shadows of ships hidden in the void. The enemy was closer than anyone dared to believe. And time was running out. The night was restless. The alarms of the colony still echoed. Soldiers searched every corner for Daniel and Alira. Their shadows stretched across the walls as searchlights moved like knives through the dark. Daniel held his breath, pressed against a cold wall. Alira leaned weakly against him, her face pale but her eyes burning with fire. He clutched the chip in his hand, the one that carried the truth. The files of the ancient war, the proof of the enemy fleet. He whispered softly, "We cannot stay here. They will find us." Alira nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she drew a simple shape in the dirt with her finger. It was a triangle with a dot in the middle. Daniel frowned. It was the symbol of the enemy fleet. He understood. They were already here. As dawn broke, Daniel moved carefully through the abandoned quarters at the edge of the colony. Old machines rusted in the silence. It was the perfect place to hide Indrisis IDE. He set up a small receiver. His hands shook as he adjusted the dials. The signal came again, stronger than before. The enemy ships were no longer hiding. They were entering the outer system. His breath caught. They had only days, maybe hours. Daniel looked at Alira. She sat quietly, her lips trembling though no voice came. Her eyes locked on him, demanding he act. He knew he had to reach Earth. Humanity had to be warned. But the colony leaders would never let him send a message. They would destroy the proof, deny the truth. They feared panic more than death. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed outside. Daniel froze. Soldiers. They were searching building by building. He quickly shut down the receiver and pulled Alira into the shadows. The door creaked open. A beam of light cut across the floor. Daniel held his breath. The soldier stepped inside, his boots clanging against the metal floor. The soldier stopped. His eyes scanned the room. He raised his weapon. Daniel's heart thundered. At that moment, Alira pressed her hand against a broken console. The machine sparked suddenly, filling the air with smoke. The soldier cursed, stepping back in confusion. Daniel seized the moment. He grabbed Alira's hand and slipped past the soldier into the alley. They ran, hearts pounding. Soldiers shouted behind them. The colony was now a trap. Every street filled with danger. Yet above them, in the sky, faint shadows began to appear. The enemy ships, massive and silent, drifting closer, their shapes like black knives against the stars. Daniel finally reached an old communication tower, long abandoned. He dragged Alira up the stairs, each step shaking under their weight. At the top, the city spread below them, lights flickering, alarms screaming. But above, the sky was no longer empty. Alira pointed upward, her hand trembling. Daniel followed her gaze, his blood ran cold. Dozens of dark shapes hung in the sky, barely visible, but there, the enemy had arrived. Daniel worked quickly, connecting wires. Powering up the old transmitter, sparks flew, but the machine came alive. He typed fast, sending a coded message toward Earth. "This is Engineer Daniel. Enemy fleet detected. Coordinates attached. Respond." His voice shook as he repeated the message, hoping someone, anyone, would hear it. Alira touched his arm, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel turned, and then he saw it. A massive beam of light burst from one of the shadows in the sky. It struck the far side of the colony. The ground shook. Buildings crumbled in flames. Screams filled the air. The invasion had begun. Panic erupted below. Soldiers shouted. Citizens ran. The leaders who once called Alira a liar now stood frozen, watching death rain from the stars. Daniel clenched his fists, rage burning inside him. They silenced her for truth, and now their world was paying the price. The communication console buzzed suddenly. A faint voice crackled through. "This is Earth Command. Signal received. Repeat. We read you." Daniel's chest tightened with relief. Humanity knew they would come. They had to. But before he could respond, the tower shook violently. Enemy drones swarmed the sky, metal beasts with glowing eyes. They fired beams that tore through the tower's structure. Daniel grabbed Alira, pulling her down as the floor cracked. The tower collapsed, fire and smoke swallowing the sky. They hit the ground hard, dust choking their lungs. Daniel coughed, pulling Alira to her feet. The colony was burning. The invasion was real. The truth was undeniable. Yet the fight was only beginning. Above them, the enemy fleet spread its wings, a storm of war descending, and somewhere beyond the stars, Earth had heard their cry. Humanity would answer. Daniel swore it. But until then, he and Alira were alone in a world that called her a liar, facing an enemy that came to destroy them all. Smoke rose across the colony. The sky burned with enemy fire. The streets were filled with chaos. Citizens ran in every direction. Soldiers tried to form lines, but their weapons looked weak compared to the power falling from the sky. Daniel pulled Alira through the ruins. His body ached, his lungs burned, but he refused to stop. The truth was now undeniable. The invaders were real. She had been right all along, and the elders had silenced her for it. They ducked into an underground tunnel. The old air smelled of dust and oil. Alira leaned against the wall, her face pale. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the dirt. She drew another symbol. Daniel leaned closer. His eyes widened. It was a map. She pointed to a hidden sector beneath the colony. Her fingers tapped again and again. "Urgent." "You want me to go there?" he whispered. She nodded, her eyes glowing with determination. They moved deeper into the tunnels. The ground shook with every distant blast. Finally, they reached a sealed door covered in strange runes. Daniel frowned. "What is this place?" Alira pressed her hand against the markings. The wall hissed and cracked open. Dust fell as the door slowly parted. Inside was a chamber filled with old machines glowing faintly, records and devices untouched for centuries. Daniel's breath caught. He realized this was the forbidden archive, the one the elders tried to erase. Here was the full truth. He activated one of the consoles. The screen flickered. Ancient logs appeared, images of burning worlds, fleets of the same enemy ships that now filled the sky. The files were clear. The invaders had attacked this system long ago and they promised to return. The elders had covered it up. They had destroyed voices like Alira's. They feared weakness more than the truth. Daniel clenched his fists, rage boiling. "They silenced you because they were afraid, not because you lied." Alira's eyes glistened with tears. She pressed her hand against his shoulder. No words, only gratitude. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them. The door shattered. Soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. "Step away from the archive, human," the commander barked. His eyes were cold. "This knowledge is forbidden. You will not spread it." Daniel's mind raced. If they destroyed the files, the truth would be buried again. The enemy would win without resistance. He grabbed the chip from his pocket, sliding it into the machine. He copied as much as he could. The soldiers fired. Beams cut through the chamber. Sparks flew. Alira dragged him behind a console, her body weak but her courage burning. Daniel shouted, "You fools! The enemy is already here. Your lies are killing your people." The commander sneered, "We will handle it. Silence is better than fear." At that moment, the ceiling shook violently. A massive blast tore through the colony above. The soldiers stumbled as debris rained down. Daniel seized the moment. He hit a hidden switch on the console. The archive lit up, sending a pulse through the tunnels. Data streamed into the system, broadcasting beyond the colony. He prayed Earth would catch it. The soldiers turned in fury. One raised his weapon to strike him down. But Alira leapt forward, weak but fearless. She grabbed the soldier's arm. Her eyes burned with silent defiance. The distraction was enough. Daniel slammed a pipe into the soldier's chest. The man collapsed. More soldiers advanced. Their eyes filled with rage. Daniel grabbed Alira's hand, pulling her through a side tunnel. They barely escaped as the chamber exploded behind them. The forbidden archive was gone, but the data was safe on his chip. They stumbled out into the night. The colony above them burned. The sky thundered as enemy ships descended lower. Daniel's chest heaved. Alira leaned against him, her body shaking. But her eyes never left the horizon. She pointed upward. Daniel followed her gaze. His breath caught. The enemy fleet was no longer dumps, distant shadows. They were close now. Massive ships glowing with fire. Whole cities trembled beneath their presence. The truth was no longer hidden. The war had begun. And Daniel knew one thing. If Earth did not come fast, they were all finished. He gripped the chip tight, his voice low, filled with steel. "We will not let them bury you again, Alira. The truth will live, and humanity will fight." She nodded, her silent tears shining in the firelight. Above them, the sky tore open as the first enemy troops descended to the ground. The real battle was about to begin. The colony burned. Flames painted the night. People screamed as enemy drones swept through the streets. Their beams cut through buildings, turning stone to ash. The air was filled with the sound of destruction. The elders who once called Alira a liar now hid like cowards, their power useless. Daniel pulled her into a hidden passage. His heart raced. His mind screamed for answers. He held the chip tight, the last proof of the truth. Humanity had to see it. Earth had to be ready. But right now, survival came first. Alira pressed her hand against the wall, drawing with blood from her cracked fingers. A shape appeared, a circle surrounded by lines. Daniel frowned. "What is it?" She tapped it again and again. Her eyes fierce. Daniel understood. It was a beacon, a signal to call for help. He nodded, his chest heavy. "Yes, I can build it." He was an engineer. Machines obeyed him, not politics, not lies. If he could send a strong enough signal, Earth would not just hear, they would act. They broke into an abandoned power station. The walls shook with each distant blast. Inside were old generators, broken wires, rusted panels. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "This will do." He worked fast, his hands steady despite the chaos. He connected wires, rerouted circuits, built a crude transmitter from scraps, sparks lit the air. Alira helped, weak but determined. She pointed to correct lines, shook her head when he made mistakes. Her silence was louder than words. She had no tongue, but she guided him with her fire. Outside, footsteps echoed, soldiers again. They were searching. The commander's voice roared through the ruins. Find the human, find the traitor. He spreads fear. Daniel ignored it. He tightened the last bolt, almost ready. The beacon hummed, lights flickered, energy pulsed through the machines. Daniel's heart pounded. Please work, he whispered. He pushed the final lever. A beam of energy shot skyward, piercing the clouds, carrying data and coordinates, carrying truth. But at that moment, the door exploded. Soldiers stormed inside, their weapons raised. The commander sneered, "You will die for this." Daniel grabbed a metal pipe, his breath quick. He was no soldier, but he would not stop. The soldiers fired, sparks flew, the power station shook. Alira crawled to the console, her fingers bleeding as she pressed the controls. She boosted the beacon's signal, her body shielded the machine as shots ricocheted. Daniel swung the pipe, knocking one soldier aside, another slammed him down. The commander raised his weapon to strike, but before the blast came, the beacon screamed. The energy surged too high. A wave of light burst through the chamber, throwing everyone off their feet. The soldiers groaned, stunned. Daniel crawled to Alira. She lay weak but alive, her eyes locked on his, desperate. The beacon still burned, its light reaching the stars. The message was gone, carried into the void. But the commander rose again, his face twisted with rage. He lifted his weapon. "You cannot save them, human. Silence is better than fear." Daniel's eyes narrowed. His voice was low, steady. "Silence kills, truth saves." He hurled the pipe at the machine. The beacon exploded in fire and light. The blast swallowed the soldiers, throwing Daniel and Alira out into the night. They landed hard among the ruins, smoke covering the sky. The colony above them was nearly gone. Enemy. Ships hovered like vultures, beams of fire raining down. Daniel's body ached, but his eyes widened as he saw the horizon. Far above, the stars flickered. Not enemy fire, but something else. A massive shadow moved in the void, sleek, sharp, powerful, a human warship. It was not just any ship. It was one of Earth's hidden giants, long kept secret. Humanity had heard. Humanity was coming. Daniel's chest tightened. Alira followed his gaze. Her tears shimmered. Her truth was no longer buried. The fight was no longer theirs alone. But before relief could take hold, the sky thundered again. The enemy fleet shifted. Dozens of warships locking their weapons on the new arrival. The real war was about to begin. Daniel gripped Alira's hand, his voice a whisper of steel. "We are not done. Not yet." She nodded, silent but fierce. The engineer and the prophet, hunted, wounded, yet unbroken. The colony may fall, but the truth now reached the stars, and with it, humanity's wrath. The sky was fire. Enemy ships covered the heavens, black silhouettes glowing with red lights. Their beams ripped through towers, turning steel into molten rivers. The colony was no longer a city. It was a battlefield. Daniel dragged Alira through the ruins. His chest burned, his body ached, but his grip on her hand never loosened. Around them, citizens cried, soldiers fell, chaos ruled. Yet above it all, one shadow moved with power unlike the others. A massive warship, human-made, cutting through the void. It was sleek, armored with black steel, its guns larger than entire alien towers. Daniel's breath caught. He whispered, "They came." Alira lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with tears of fire. For the first time, hope touched her broken heart. The enemy fleet reacted fast. Dozens of ships turned, locking weapons on the human warship. Beams of fire lit the sky. The human ship absorbed the first hiss. Tease, its shields glowing bright. Then it answered. A single cannon fired, a beam so powerful it split the night. One enemy cruiser exploded in silence, flames scattering across the stars. The colony shook as if the heavens themselves had cracked. Citizens froze, watching in awe. The same humans they once mocked, the same race they doubted, had sent a weapon beyond anything they had ever seen, but the battle was not one-sided. Enemy swarms descended like locusts, thousands of drones screaming through the air. They struck the ground, tearing through streets, hunting every survivor. Daniel pulled Alira into a broken shelter, his voice low but steady. "We cannot hide forever. We must move. We must help." Alira's hands trembled as she drew again on the ground. a star surrounded by fire. Daniel frowned. He realized what she meant. The core, the energy source. She nodded sharply. Her plan was clear. If they reached the colony's hidden core and overloaded it, they could blast half the enemy swarm from the sky. But it was suicide. Daniel clenched his jaw. His mind screamed with fear, but his heart refused to let the invaders win. "If that's what it takes, we'll do it," he whispered. Aelira pressed her weak hand against his, a silent oath. Above them, the human warship unleashed more fury. Squadrons of human fighters burst from its hangars, sleek ships darting through enemy lines. Their weapons cut drones from the sky like rain. For every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. The colony became a storm of fire and shadows. Daniel and Aelira ran through burning streets, dodging falling debris. Enemy drones spotted them. Beams slashed the ground behind. Daniel grabbed a fallen rifle from a dead soldier. He fired, clumsy but desperate. Sparks flew as one drone collapsed in flames. He shouted, "Go!" pulling Aelira forward. At last, they reached the entrance to the core chamber. The door was guarded. Enemy soldiers stood with weapons ready. Daniel's chest tightened. He had no army, only a stolen rifle, but he had Aelira, and he had fury. He looked at her, whispering, "Stay close." She nodded, her eyes sharp. Together they moved. Daniel fired wildly, beams cutting past him. Aelira threw a piece of burning metal, distracting the guards. In the chaos, Daniel stormed the entrance, blasting one soldier, slamming another with the butt of the rifle. His heart pounded, blood filled his mouth, but he did not stop. They burst into the chamber. The core glowed like a star trapped in glass, its power humming through the walls. Aelira pointed frantically, guiding him. Daniel rushed to the controls. His hands shook as he worked the machines. "If I overload this, it will take half of them down," he muttered. But before he could finish, the commander appeared, his armor black, his eyes filled with hate. He raised his weapon. "Traitor, you will end here." Daniel froze. The commander aimed straight at his chest, but then Aelira moved, her body weak yet burning with courage. She stood between them, her silence louder than any words, her eyes fierce. The commander hesitated for a second, then fired. Daniel screamed. The shot struck, but not her. A beam from above sliced through the commander first. His body turned to ash. Daniel looked up, his chest heavy with shock. Through the broken ceiling, the human warship hovered close, its cannons roaring, its shadow covered the chamber. Humanity had come. Humanity was fighting for them. Daniel finished the sequence. The core began to glow brighter. Energy surged. Alarm screamed. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Aelira. They fled as the chamber shook. Behind them, the core exploded in a storm of fire, blasting drones and enemy ships from the sky. The colony shook. The heavens burned. When the dust settled, silence filled the air. Dozens of enemy ships had fallen, hundreds of drones destroyed. The people stared at the wreckage in awe. For the first time, victory felt possible. Daniel collapsed. And beside Aelira, his body broken but his eyes fierce. "It's not over," he whispered. She looked at him, nodding. Her eyes spoke the words her tongue could not. The fight was not finished, but hope was alive. Above, the human warship turned slowly, its guns glowing. It was ready for the next strike. The galaxy had just witnessed the rise of humanity's wrath. The colony was ash, but it still stood. Smoke curled into the sky as survivors crawled from the ruins. Their faces were pale with fear and shock, yet their eyes lifted toward the heavens. There, the real war raged. The human warship moved like a predator, its black hull glowing with lines of fire. Enemy cruisers swarmed around it, beams of energy slamming into its shields. Each strike shook the void, but the ship held strong. With every counterattack, enemy vessels erupted into flame. One by one, the invaders realized what they had awakened, humanity's hidden blade. Daniel and Aelira watched from the shattered courtyard, her face streaked with dust and blood, his body heavy with exhaustion, yet their eyes burned with the same fire. The truth was alive, and it was tearing through the sky. The alien elders stumbled from their chambers, robes torn, faces pale. They looked at the destruction with horror. They once called Alira a liar. They once cut her tongue. Now the evidence was above their heads, undeniable. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rough. This is your fault. You silenced her, you buried the truth, and now your world bleeds. The elders could not speak. Shame crushed their words. They bowed their heads, the weight of guilt breaking their pride. Above them, the enemy fleet shifted. Their flagships moved closer, larger than mountains, weapons glowing like suns. Even the human warship trembled before such power. Daniel's chest tightened. One ship cannot fight them all, he whispered. Alira touched his arm, her eyes fierce. She pointed to the sky, then pressed her hand to her heart. Daniel understood. The beacon, the signal they sent, had reached Earth. That single war. Ship was not alone. Humanity never fought alone. Moments later, the stars lit with fire. More shadows appeared at the edge of space. Warships, dozens of them, each one massive, each one ready. The fleet of Earth had arrived. The galaxy changed in that instant. The invaders roared forward, unleashing all their fury. The void blazed with war. Human ships answered. Their cannons screamed. Their missiles cut through the dark. The battle became a storm. From the ground, survivors lifted their eyes. Their fear turned to awe. They had mocked humanity. They had doubted their strength. But now they saw the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was the storm. Daniel held Alira close as shockwaves thundered across the land. Look, he whispered, they will never silence you again. She stared at the sky, tears shining. Her truth was now carved into the stars. The battle raged for hours. Fire split the heavens. Ships fell like burning comets. At last, the enemy flagship, massive and black, turned its weapons on the colony, preparing to erase it all. Daniel's breath caught. The survivors screamed, but the human fleet moved in unity. Their guns focused, their fire combined. A single devastating beam tore through the flagship. Its hull cracked, its core exploded. The shockwave ripped through the void. Enemy ships scattered, broken, leaderless. Silence followed. The invaders were gone. Their fleet shattered, their threat destroyed. Humanity stood victorious. The colony survivors fell to their knees. Some cried, some prayed, all humbled. Their world was saved not by their own leaders, but by the very truth they had buried. Daniel stood tall, Alira at his side. He raised the chip high, his voice strong. This is the proof. She was right. Her words were truth. You cut her tongue, but you cannot cut truth. His voice echoed across the ruins, carried by every survivor's ears. The elders lowered their heads. Forgive us, one whispered. But forgiveness did not matter. What mattered was justice. What mattered was that the galaxy now knew. Alira stepped forward, weak but unbroken, her eyes fierce. She placed her hand on her chest, then pointed to the stars. The people understood. Their silence had ended. Her truth now lived in every soul. The human fleet hovered above, guardians of a broken world. Their presence was a promise. Humanity would not allow lies to rule. Humanity would not allow truth to be silenced. Daniel whispered to her, his voice soft. They called you a liar, but now you are their prophet. Her tears fell, silent but powerful. Her tongue was gone, but her truth roared louder than any voice. The galaxy would remember this day, the day a silenced girl spoke through fire and war, the day humanity proved that truth was stronger than fear. And as the stars burned with victory, Daniel knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new story, a story where truth could never again be cut away.